I'm dying. Now what? Check the spelling, because as far as you know, I might be talking about creating this tie-dye behind me or coloring Easter eggs. I admit, I purposefully got your attention in a somewhat inappropriate way on purpose. But we are going to talk about the hard one, the hard stuff, real death. And it's been on my mind a lot lately because about a month ago, a very good friend of mine called to tell me that she had been diagnosed with a condition that is basically a precursor to the cancer that took her mother's life a year ago. And she can't get a full diagnosis on whether or not this is going to turn into something else, become greater, ultimately take her life like it took her mother's life. Because if she goes through those preliminary tests, she won't ever be eligible for life insurance, and she'll be blackballed by her health insurance company. And I tell you, that really sucks. She's in the prime of her life, and she just found out that her days are numbered. And in my own Kaaren way, you know, I took her news and I took it in, and I'm lucky that she's known me a long time and shows me a lot of grace, because she's one of few people that I can openly and honestly speak my mind to, and I don't have to apologize or tread lightly, although I have been lately. But she understands that whatever I say to her, whatever I give, whatever I offer, comes from a good, genuine place. And after the initial shock, I found myself saying to her, and it actually became the whole premise for this video, and there probably aren't going to be any bloopers. I'm probably going to shoot this as a one take straight through, because if I don't know if I'm going to get through it, because I have a lot to say about a lot of hard stuff. So I found myself, after getting this heavy news and having walked the walk with her when it came her mom's time to go, I called her up and I said, you know what? We're all dying. From the moment we're born, it's the only, I mean, I know there's jokes about, you know, the only definite things in life are death and taxes, but it's the one clock that starts ticking, right? And some of us are given the gift of lots of time, and some are given the gift of a lot shorter time. And I found myself saying to her, once this shock is over and once you've processed this, you know, you have a choice. You can either get up the next day and feel sorry for yourself, or you can grab it by the you-know-whats and say, okay, I'm going to live life, and I'm going to live my life in every way that I choose to live it. I'm going to experience all the thingies, I'm going to do all the thingies, instead of just feeling sorry for myself and deciding that I'm going to let some diagnosis or threat of a diagnosis have an impact on the rest of whatever I have left in my life. And I didn't want to come across harsh to her, but that's the reality. It's the reality for all of us. You know, this life that we live is short. And like I said, sometimes it's shorter for some than it is for others. So choose for it to be the best that it can be for you. This same friend is going to come in later in our story. But in that same week, I got a call from my son's grandmother, his father's mother, that she just was not feeling too well. And she's the primary caregiver for her husband, who's not doing too well. And she's basically on duty 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I hesitate to share this story, and I'd rather get forgiveness than permission a lot of times, because it's easier. But in this case, I actually had a conversation with her oldest son about my hesitance to share their story and what's going on in their life and our life. And with so much grace, he said, well, it's your story too. So as delicately as possible, I'm going to share how my story relates to their story and how it's the reason why things are just really heavy around here for us right now. This is about a month ago, and she just wasn't feeling up, so I helped bring, as we often do, I helped them go back and forth to doctor appointments and things like that, and she just wasn't feeling well. A week after that, she was just not in a good place, so we went to the doctor. They ended up treating her for something unrelated, gave her a CT scan thinking maybe she bumped her head or maybe that was the reason for how she was feeling. Didn't really check some other symptoms. Week after that, 2 weeks after that, not feeling well, still not feeling well, tired, just used up, worn out, to be perfectly honest with you. The statistics on caregivers giving out before their caregivees, the statistics on that are astronomical, and it didn't really surprise anybody that she was just tired and she needed a break. So we started the process, actually enlisted the help of hospice. So I was driving home from the doctor appointment where the subject of hospice first came up. And I myself, had my own preconceived notions of what it meant to enlist the help of hospice, right? And so I called my friend, that friend that I mentioned in the beginning of this video, because I know that her mother had spent a great deal of time with hospice. That's where her memorial service took place, was at this, one of the most beautiful services I've ever been a part of, but it was at a gazebo at the hospice facility, Memorial Garden, and it was just beautiful. And so I called her like somehow she's the authority on hospice, and I started asking her questions. And no sooner had, I told her what we were going through and that the subject had come up and could she help recommend, or she said, today's the 1-year anniversary. And I was speechless. For a rare moment, I stopped talking and I felt cruel. I felt a little heartless. I felt thoughtless. It was ironic that on the day that she was remembering, here I was calling and reminding. And whenever you bring up that word hospice, people immediately go to, oh my gosh, the end is near, we only have a couple of days or whatever. Let me just tell you that that is not at all the case. People can go into hospice and even come out of it. Hospice is a wonderful organization. I have only the best things to say for the group that we're working with. And basically what they could help provide was respite time, and extra help around the house, and just resources that, she or we hadn't looked into yet. So we were just in the process of enlisting hospice, getting extra support, and we got a phone call last Saturday night that she was convinced she was dying. And while we were driving down to her, we called 911 to make sure that an ambulance would meet us there. And they came and took her out on a stretcher, and watching them say goodbye to each other and not knowing if they would ever see each other again was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to see. And so I went to the hospital with her, and my son stayed with his grandfather that night. And what followed, and what's still unraveling, is she, among other things, has pneumonia. And it's the type of pneumonia that's vicious, and it's unrelenting, and it's not wanting to let go of her, to the point where we thought she wasn't going to make it. And a couple days ago, we were making phone calls and making plans for a funeral this weekend. I found myself thinking about everything, everyone, being overwhelmed by it all. As a mom, I couldn't help but think about my son and what this would do, how this would affect him. These are his father's parents. And as I've kind of hinted at, his father died a little over 8 years ago while he was coaching his Little League baseball team. So death doesn't make us any better at it than other people, but it's not a stranger in our house. But every time the possibility rears its ugly head, we can't help but go back there, right? And so we put on our strong faces and we show up ready to fight and do all the things and support all the people. And it doesn't make it any less difficult. So I wanted to share with you guys, if, I can't say that someone dying, someone reaching the end of their life, I don't know that there's necessarily a way to make lemonade out of that. And, I kind of warned you that not everything that we would talk about on this channel would be easy. It would be challenging. It would be raw sometimes and honest. But I found myself in talking to my own son, my own family, my own mother, learning something from all this. And for what it's worth, I want to share that part of this journey with you, because I think the one thing that I can say is my takeaway from this is that before your end comes, or before that time comes when your own family members or parents are going through similar challenges, struggles, the inevitable. I mean, we're not living forever. I know we joke about that and everything, and maybe you'll donate your brain to science and come back as a robot someday. I don't know. But we're all going to die one day, and we don't do a really good job as a society talking openly about that. We're certainly not very kind to each other. And I don't even know if it's on purpose. I think it's just because we lack the skills, ability, tools, compassion, or just comfort in ourselves. Yeah, when you're comfortable with yourself, you can provide comfort to another. Does that make sense? So what I learned through all of this was to be prepared. Like, I find myself now wanting to have a conversation with my own mother to make sure things like, end-of-life plans are in place. Do you have a DNR, or do not resuscitate, or it's a living will is another option, where you sort of set out what you want to happen to yourself if you're ever, God forbid, in a position where the choice needs to be made whether to shove a tube down your throat or let nature play itself out. Who's going to take care of your cat? Do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Who gets to inherit all of your thingies? I'm going to tell you that is really lowest on the list for me. I found myself sort of in this sea of confusion, which has been part of this last month, thinking, I will never leave my son in a position where he doesn't know. Like, it's hard enough to walk this part, the end of life, with someone. It's hard enough to do that with strength and love and compassion for another person. But let me tell you something, it makes it harder when you don't have direction and you have to suddenly be making all of the decisions for someone who potentially used to make all of the decisions for you. So I want to have all of my affairs in order, and I think it's important. So have that conversation with your mom, with your dad, with your spouse, with your partner, and if it's age appropriate, have it with your kids, because life is finite and you never know. You just don't. Trust me. I've got some experience with this, and it doesn't hurt, as with anything else, to be proactive. Because here's the thing. If you or your parents, your spouse, your partner, all of those people that we just mentioned, if you don't have your affairs and your instructions in order and haven't made the choices that should be made for you, guess what's going to happen? Somebody else is going to make them. Maybe your children will be able to make them for you, but if you don't have legal documents in place, I guarantee you, you're leaving the door open just wide enough for someone else, like social services, to make decisions when it comes to your affairs, your house, your own children. And that scares me. That's just to no end. And it makes it difficult. I can't even for the life of me, I can't imagine my son being in a position where he has to make some of the decisions or choices that have to be made. And granted, maybe he's not going to be happiest or most comfortable with the outline that I make for myself, but I can choose how and what happens to me. And I would hope that if you're able to, I get it, I'm lucky. I talk probably more openly and honestly with my son than most people. And that, I know it's a gift. I know it's a blessing. We've been through a lot together. And we were just talking last night on the way to visit his grandma, who, oh yeah, by the way, miracle of miracles, she's doing great. We went from literally roller coaster of, but we went from literally making those plans to she's out of ICU, tubes have been removed, and she's on the mend. So I made a couple of phone calls, one of which was to a pastor, Pastor Randy. And again, irony, he married my son's father and I, and also performed his father's funeral service. And so I called Randy thinking that just in case, it might be a good idea if God showed up at the hospital the next time we went to go visit Ben's grandmother, my son. And I can remember when we walked in, she had just come back. They had taken the tube out. She was conscious. She was still a little out of it. But I can remember her looking up and recognizing me. But then seeing him, and for a brief instant, I think she thought we were there to read last rites or something. And this look of panic came across her face, and I immediately said, no, that's not what, we're just here to pray a little bit. Yeah, I can't even imagine. But I'd like to think that couple of moments that we did give it all up and say a prayer and just ask for, God's will to be done in that instance, that it was, because a day later she's sitting up and eating solid food, and again, miracle of miracles, she was beating it and she was fighting it, and that's all I could ever ask her to do. After running the race, losing this battle for sure, I told her that she was going to have to be spicy, and she's a fighter, and we know she's a fighter, and it was time for her to be strong, and she was, and she is, and she's not going down without a fight, and she's going to give this pneumonia a run for its money. And she'll tell you, don't smoke. She'll tell you, take better care of yourself. And she'll tell you, take advantage of the time that you have and love the people you love as much as you can. Because we had that exact conversation last night when we went to go visit her. But we're able to talk, my son and I, about all of those things. And sometimes they're really hard. So I hope that you can have conversations like that, or at least have it in writing, because it should scare you to think what will happen to you. Not all your stuff. Stuff doesn't matter. But what could potentially happen to you or your loved ones if you don't have a plan in place? I'm telling you, it scares me. It makes me uncomfortable. And this video, I know, a little clickbaity in the title, and I apologize for that. I misspelled it on purpose. I think I said that. But we sometimes need to talk about this kind of stuff in a way that we can be open, honest, compassionate, and we can compare notes and share, I don't know, share our thoughts, our feelings, our anger, our curiosity, all of it. And that's one of the goals that I have with this channel. So if this is kind of catching some of you off guard, I'm not going to apologize because it's part of what makes me who I am. And I think the whole idea about sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly all together stems from, I'll give you this example. So when my son was younger and he was going to preschool, I can remember, really stressing over pacifiers. I can really remember stressing over, did he learn to walk or crawl in time when he was supposed to? I can remember stressing over potty training. Oh my gosh. When he learned to read, all of these things. And a mom said to me once, best advice I've ever gotten, she said, Kaaren, is he going to be wearing a diaper when he's 23? Do you think he won't be reading when he goes to college? Do you think he'll still be drinking out of a bottle? Okay, are you with me? So all things happen in the time that they're supposed to. And what I learned, I wish that I had shared and opened up with a community sooner. Like if I had known that there were other Me Too's out there, it would have helped me so much with the things that I was anxious about. When we come together and we share these things, the hard things, the happy things, and it's not always going to be gloom and doom type stuff here. But it needs to be real, because my personal soapbox is that as a society, and America's different, and believe me, I've done research and I can quote all kind of studies and cultures, and we can have a conversation about death around the world, another day, but I don't think we handle it well. I don't think we're taught how to support each other. I don't think we're even taught etiquette. One of the things, I went to a women's group and I spoke at this wonderful night about grit. And one of the women that got up, when she was closing, she said, stop apologizing for the things you have to do as a mom. Like if you have to go pick up your kid from school, or you have to take off early to go to a recital or whatever, as women we tend to say I'm sorry a lot. And she said, own it. It's just part of you. And I couldn't help but think when it became my turn to speak, I said, and it kind of caught people. I'm like a brick wall sometimes when I bring up the whole death thing. But I said, and another thing about words mattering. Stop apologizing when someone dies. My response to that was when someone would say, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I would say, why? Was it your fault? Yeah, well, that's just me. And I think I'll leave you on that note. So another snippet into now what? In this case, I'm dying. We're all dying. So how can we do it better? How can we do it full of more grace and compassion? And that's part of what I'd like to talk to you about here. So consider subscribing. If you have to go, I get it, but I hope you'll stay along for the journey. Like it or not, leave some comments below so we can continue the dialogue. You're catching this video on Just Ask Kaaren, because when you don't know, what are you going to do? Jack, right?